Hi everybody, this is set 90 on page 610. This lesson is about mixed number coefficients and negative coefficients. And we are going to review some problems that we have already learned and see how they are now taking it up a notch to make it slightly more complicated. So let's get started. Okay, we have already seen problems like these where we have a unknown number multiplied by something to get another number, and we have to figure out this missing number. And in this problem, you should recall that when you see a number beside a unknown number called a variable, that means they are multiplied together. So it would be 4/5 times something equals 7, and we have to figure out what that something is. And what you need to keep in mind is this term above the 4/5 called coefficient. Whatever number, whether it be a fraction or a decimal or just a whole number, whatever number it is, multiplied by the unknown number, the variable, that number is called the coefficient. So this number that's multiplied by the unknown number is always the coefficient. And the way we work these problems is we find the reciprocal of the coefficient. The reciprocal means when you flip it. If it's a whole number, you turn it into an improper fraction and flip that. If it would be a decimal number, we would handle it a little bit differently. But as a fraction, we would multiply that by the reciprocal. And we would do that by simply just going like this, and flip it, 5/4. And you recall parentheses also means times. Whatever we do to one side of the equation, on the one side of the equal side, we have to do to the other side. So we need to multiply the 7 by 5/4 as well. So you can put this over 1 and put times 5/4. Then on this side, 5's cancel out, the 4's cancel out, and we're left with simply the unknown number, which is what we want, the unknown variable. And we work this out over here to figure out what x is going to be. So we just multiply this out. There's no canceling that can be done. 7 times 5 is 35. 1 times 4 is 4. And you can leave it like that, except we ought to change that to a mixed number. And in algebra, sometimes you can leave it as an improper fraction, but we do need to always try to be in the practice of simplifying it into the basic form that it can be, which would be a mixed number. So that would equal, if 4 were to go into 35, 8 times with 3 left over, so 8 3/4 would be your answer. Okay, let's look at the examples beginning on page 611. Okay, example 1 on page 611 says 3 1/3 x equals 5. So we know that the 3 1/3 is our coefficient because it is multiplied by our unknown variable. So the first thing we need to do is to change this to an improper fraction, because we cannot multiply or divide a mixed number. You cannot do that. It will never come out right. So those of you still doing that need to stop. Always change that to an improper fraction. So, and I'm also going to change the 5 to an improper fraction because we're going to have to do that anyway when we deal with fraction coefficients. So let's change the 3 1/3 into improper fraction. That would be 10/3 times x equals 5/1. Okay, this is our coefficient. To solve this, we need to flip it and multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 10/3 would be 3/10. You multiply 3/10. These all cancel out, and now we just have this one. Hopefully you can tell at this point that there can be some canceling done with the 5 and the 10. 5 goes into itself one time, 5 into 10 two times, and then we are simply left with 1 times 3 is 3, and 1 times 2 is 2, and so you have 3/2, or 1.5, and that would be what your answer is. Okay, let's move on to example 2. All right, in example 2, we have a mixed number on both sides of the equation, but this is no problem because, again, we can just change it to an improper fraction. So our coefficient is 2 1/2 because it is multiplied by the unknown variable. So let's change this to an improper fraction first. So 2 1/2 would be 5/2 times y. Let's change this to an improper fraction as well. That would be 15/8. And then to solve it, we multiply both sides by the reciprocal of this coefficient. So the reciprocal of 5 over 2 would be 2 over 5. Multiply, multiply, 2 over 5. Cancel, 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 cancel. We can do some canceling here as well. 5 and 15. So 5 divided by 5 is 1. 15 divided by 5 is 3. We can also do 2 and 8. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 3 times 1 is 3. 4 times 1 is 4. And there is your answer. Okay, let's move on to the next section called negative coefficients. Okay, with the negative coefficients, we will work these exactly the same as we do when they're all positive numbers. We just have to remember the rules about multiplying and dividing positive and negative numbers. And so you have to keep those rules in mind as we do this. There are actually two ways we can work this problem, and I'll show you both of them. And depending on the numbers of the problem, you will probably have a good sense of what needs to be done. You can work this as a typical division problem, or you can turn this into a fraction problem and solve it that way. But you get the same answer both ways, except sometimes if you have a decimal number one way, you would get a mixed number answer if you do it the fraction way. So there can be some changes, but the answer should equal the same thing. All right, so the simplest way for me to solve this would be we have to divide both sides by whatever is multiplied by the unknown variable. So this is what's multiplied. So negative 3, I'm going to put parentheses around that so we don't forget that it's negative. Negative 3 is our coefficient. So to divide that, to figure that out, we need to divide this by negative 3. We also need to divide this by negative 3 because whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other side. Then the negative 3 cancels out. The negative as well as the 3 cancels out. And over here, we just have to figure out what 126 divided by 3 is. Now, first thing we need to remember is this is a positive number. They don't tell us that, but since they don't tell us anything, we assume it's positive. 126 is positive. Negative 3 is, of course, negative. So a positive divided by a negative should get you a negative answer. I go ahead and put that negative there so I don't forget it because that's a very easy mistake. Then you just go off to the side and you figure out what 126 divided by 3 is. 3 into 12 would be 4. And 3 into 6 would be 2. And there you go. So you just put that over here. Your negative's already there. Your answer is negative 42. Very simple. So now here's the other way to solve this using fractions, which I'll just rewrite it, which is slightly more complicated, but depending on your problem, you will need to do this. So if we were to turn negative 3 into a improper fraction, we would put it over 1. You can go ahead and put this over 1 as well. And then since this is the coefficient, we would flip it, multiply it by the reciprocal. So I would do that by putting it in parentheses so I don't forget. So I'm going to put 1 over negative 3 there. Then this one, I'm also going to put 1 over negative 3 there. This all cancels out, including the negatives. We're left with x. And then on this side, we would work it out the same way. You would know that this would become 126 over negative 3. And again, you just divide it out, work it out. You get the same thing, negative 42. So either way, you get the same answer, just different ways of working that out. All right, let's look at example 3. Okay, in this problem, we have fractions on both sides of the equations, so that we know the best thing to do is to flip the coefficient and multiply. So what I'm going to do is put parentheses around this so we don't forget that that negative goes to that. It gets a little bit confusing because you say, well, I don't know if the negative goes on with the top number or the bottom number. It really does not matter when we work these, and you'll see why in the end. So let's multiply this by, flip this, so this would become negative 3 over 2. Put parentheses around that so we don't forget. And then we also need to multiply over here. I usually like to do parentheses and the multiplication sign when I'm doing these. So negative 3 over 2. And don't get this confused thinking 4/5 minus 3 over 2. That's not what we have. We have a negative 3/2. That's why I like to make sure I include that multiplication sign so I don't forget that. All right, this all cancels out. Cancel, cancel. It's all gone. This is by itself. Now here's the thing. 4/5 is a positive number. 3 over 2 is the negative number. It doesn't matter if the negative's up top or bottom because when you have one negative and everything else is positive, the whole thing becomes negative. So I'm just going to put the negative down there. We're going to work this out like usual. 2 goes into itself once, 2 goes into 4, 2. That's all the canceling I can do. When we work all this out, we have 2 times 3 is 6, and 5 times 1 is 5. And we have negative 6 over 5, or negative 1 1/5. Okay, that's how you do example 3. We're going to look at the last one, example 4. Okay, in example 4, we have a negative coefficient, and then we have a decimal answer over here. So I would not recommend changing this into an improper fraction and then figuring out with a decimal. That's just going to make it really complicated. What I would suggest doing is you simply divide both sides by the coefficient. So if we divide this by the coefficient, we have negative 5 at the bottom there, negative 5 over here. This all cancels out. And so we need to figure out now what 0.24 divided by negative 5 is. So I'm going to go over here to the side and just do 0.24 divided by 5. Don't worry about the negative. I'm going to put the negative here so I don't forget to put it with my answer. If you are just simply going to work this out over here and put your answer here, go ahead and put the negative there. You can keep the negative, move the negative over, okay? Because a positive divided by negative is a negative answer. Go ahead also and bring up your decimal so you don't forget where the decimal goes. So we know 5 goes into 0, 0 times. 5 goes into 2, 0 times. 5 can go into 24. That would be 4 times, and that would get you 20. We have 4 left over. We cannot do a fraction with a decimal. Don't even attempt that. Add another 0, bring it down, and we can say 5 into 40 would be 8 times. Now we have an even answer. And so then you just simply write it over here with your equation, and that is your answer, 0.048. So if you have any questions, let me know.